今日はちょっと君に新たな能力をつけてみた。
Yeah, might also want to fix up those obvious flaps on that prosthetic. Or maybe that guy just lost a lot of weight, which in that case, good for you, dude. We opened this week right after the events of last, with Shoma catching up with Hanto. Now, of course, this could have been the point where the two riders start butting heads for the season, as they commonly do, and the preview from last week even kind of hinted at that, but... And from there, the two tried their hardest to hide their identities and origins. This, combined with some logical, yet still pretty goofy little misunderstandings, made this one of the funniest scenes in the show so far, especially as the two tried to play things as cool as possible while hiding their real faces, which was easy enough thanks to the costumes they were wearing. Pretty much every edgelord's first meeting ever. And yes, this show did kind of troll us hard with that episode preview, making it look like we were going to get the usual main and secondary rider rivalry right from the get-go, and yet, I also kind of appreciate that they went against the grain. And hey, who's to say, kind of like Geets and Tycoon, that they won't eventually start butting heads later in the series when the conflict intensifies? Hell, after the trauma of last week, a little light comedy is actually appreciated. Anyway, the two also ended up naming themselves, with Hanto going with Valen based on Valentine's, the day when chocolate becomes the highest selling food product, and Shoma, finally after 7 episodes, started calling himself Gavv, which for his race is pretty much on the nose, isn't it? Yeah, again, just gotta appreciate how freaking adorkable these two are. Later, Shoma took a job with Sachika to clean up her grandmother's mansion. At the same time, they also met a couple of tenants who Granny was lending rooms and a good chunk of her house to do their painting. Yeah, much like her granddaughter, she actually wanted to help people, including some starving artists. Anyway, the two started cleaning, but Shoma's grand youth strength kind of threw things off just a little. What? He's just trying to make the biggest omelet ever. Thus, he instead tried to help one of the artists named Tamaki. And I guess he was trying to create an angel with some biblical accuracy. Again, though, he ended up breaking something, this time an arm from the statue, but I guess like the Venus de Milo, she figured that's exactly what her piece needed, so it was all good. And hey, if all else fails, you can always just call in the OG Precure, and I'm sure they'll provide you with a great art piece. Meanwhile, in what I could only describe as the J.J. Abrams road with how much freaking lens flare it had going, the twins encountered their big sister Gloda. She of course chewed them out over their failures, though not literally, as that is kind of a thing that these aliens can do, and said that she'd take over things for this week. Also, on a bit of a side note, I'm only now starting to realize how freaking short Jeeb's actor is. Like sure, Gloda's actress Machitose is a fairly tall lady as she is also a model, but Ryuto Koga is kind of a shrimpy little man. Anyway, at the same time, Suga continued to be shady as all hell, and hinted that there might be other researchers like him. And on that note, Shoma paid a visit to an actual Grand Youth researcher in his Grunkle Dente, who had a new gadget that surprisingly I haven't found listings for, at least as of the time of this writing. Kind of weird, considering I found listings for the other 2 new toys introduced in this episode that were released around the time the show started, but whatever. They did at least show off its main gimmick, which was to work with the Gochizos, which in this case allowed him to see visualizations of their memories. And as it just so happened, he put in a Gochizo that had seen Valen's fight, which got an interesting reaction out of Dente, as though he might have known who had created the Valen Buster. I really like this part of the episode, as it really shows how many different gears are turning with all of these characters that will likely lead to some interesting little clashes later. But yeah, in between all of this, Tamaki had seemingly been scouted by an art gallery owner, and yeah, you can guess where this was going. The next day, Shoma and Hanto met properly for the first time untransformed, and of course unaware of each other's alter egos. However, the former did end up learning that the latter was researching the Grand Youth and Gavv, aka himself. Thus, this led to another really funny bit where the two tried to hold back their inner thoughts, where they were making some really meme-worthy faces. Again, after an opening arc where there was almost nothing but traumatic moments, this sort of levity is much appreciated. Anyway, the two parted ways, mostly none the wiser, just as Shoma was informed about Tamaki's capture thanks to one of his patrolling Gochizos. With that, he confronted the Monster of the Week, where much of the first part of the fight took place off-screen, just so that Hanto could later walk in on a destroyed gallery. Their fight moved into the parking lot, where Shoma's enemy had the advantage due to having ranged attacks. Thus, he had to debut a new form, and of course, since he originally created them, he could also use the Chocolate Gochizos to gain a gunner form. And yeah, while a little racist, I do like the theming of him turning into a Mexican cowboy, complete with a poncho made of chocolate. In fact, I kind of like it a little more than Valen's base form design, as it doesn't feel as disjointed. Granted, Hanto still had the much better weapon, as Shoma used a chocolate bar gun that fired little chunks of cacao, and I guess was killing the monster with diabetes. Well, whatever, it still led to a fun and creative fight scene, especially this bit where the two started to fire at each other through the walls. And eventually, he defeated the monster with a finisher that, yeah, you see it too, don't you?
Whoa! What is that?
During all of this, Hanto had come to investigate another one of the Grand Nude's victims, and ended up running into Glota, who, in keeping with this episode's theme of misunderstandings, mistook him for the Grand Nude. As such, she treated him like all of her employees. Damn, dude, you usually have to pay good money for that. Of course, Hanto ended up revealing that he was both a human and a Kamen Rider determined to defeat the Grand Nude, ending this episode with an awesome cliffhanger with Glota getting her weapon out and getting ready to fight him. However, another thing that was going on, and is probably worth mentioning, was Sachika trying to cheer up the other artists who, rather appropriately, have been drawing very Van Gogh-ish art pieces, and yet was seemingly overlooked for someone else. Thus, it probably wasn't a good idea to try and cheer him up, as he ended up snapping and throwing paint at Sachika. This is obviously setting up the main conflict for the next episode, and maybe even a little story arc for Sachika, where she starts to realize that her methods of helping others might not be as foolproof as she thinks. And who knows, this might lead to some other developments, but we'll talk about that in just a bit. This was an episode that the show kind of needed, both in terms of progressing the story a little more, but especially for lightening the mood a little. I mean, while I won't say the show has been needlessly grimdark or anything, having a little comedy after last week's episode was more than warranted, and was really well done in both bits with the writers. And even with that, it didn't stop this episode from flowing smoothly like melted chocolate. Call it a subversion of expectations or whatever you want, it was actually a nice surprise, in this case, to have the first encounter between the writers be a bit more of a comedic affair, as not only did it provide some good laughs, but even some good characterization, showing how, in spite of the boatloads of trauma between these two men, they were still socially awkward dudes who wanted to come off as cool, and yet were internally making some amazing faces. And this could lead to some interesting stories later when they start to clear things up, but for now, this story that's also going to be the first real two-parter for this series was all about the other developing plot points between the Grand Nude researchers, the Stolmachs, and next week, seemingly Sachika as she tries to cheer up the wannabe Van Gogh. While it's hard to say what exactly she's going to learn from the story arc, the end result is seemingly being hinted at with the opening, where she's in the lineup with the Riders. She also has blank bubbles that, for the guys, reveal their secret identities, so yeah, it seems like they're hinting at her becoming the third or tertiary rider of the show, which has kind of been a thing ever since Revise with Jean. And considering how much fun and likable of a character Sachika has been, that'll be great to see. In the meantime though, it's also exciting to see Hanto learn more about the Grand Nudes, and at least for now, working with Shoma. And overall, this is easily the funniest episode of the series so far, while still having plenty of plot progression going on. If anything, I'll look forward to seeing the Chocolate Riders really go nuts next week. Thank you for watching, and maybe you can check out some of our other videos on this channel if you're interested. With a proper schedule in place, we can actually start to work on some other videos that we've been meaning to get to, whilst also entertaining you with our usual fare every week. Look forward to whatever comes next, and until then though, for now my friends, and
I've been trying to catch you boys all day! I'd like to buy all your chocolate.
oh, well, if you don't mind homemade.